Just taking a look at the rand strength that's filtered through, it's surprised many quarters, but many still saying that it could come under renewed pressure in the days ahead as we've got fears of global contagion from the Eurozone's debt problems, particularly Greece, continuing to persist.
Hi, Alishia. Yes, that's absolutely right. I mean, the rand has had quite a tremendous run over the last 2 weeks and finally broke below that 765 level yesterday. So certainly there is some risk of retracement in the short term, either due to just some technical levels or perhaps some profit taking on behalf of investors there. And as you mentioned, there are also very good fundamental reasons why the rand could lose steam from here on out.
Nomvuyo, if I can ask you, the tremendous strength in the rand in this short term, if let's say a client, an importing client, has got some imports coming in a month's time, would you advise the client strongly to take forward cover now at these levels, or do you think there's still further strengthening potential?
I think as far as, certainly if you're talking about the rand versus the dollar, I would suggest that you look to take some forward cover now. We've been saying for some time that we don't really think that this rand's rally is based on fundamentals, and that means that it's quite vulnerable to a change in risk sentiment, and that could happen at any point. We could have adverse developments out of Greece, we could have significantly worse data out of either the US or China on a sustained basis that would turn the market's mood quite significantly. So given that there are no underlying fundamental reasons why the rand has strengthened this far or should even continue to strengthen, I would certainly suggest that you try and lock in current levels.
It's on that basis where we've got this rand momentum coming through, not on the back of fundamentals, that puts rand strength against the dollar evident, but not against other crosses, right?
Well, I mean, it's strengthened to an extent against other crosses, but that hasn't been a uniform strength. Its most pronounced strength has been against the dollar this year, and that's really because what we've seen has been a tremendous rally in risk assets, and that has been against a backdrop of quite a bad environment for the dollar. And that's why you've seen emerging market currencies, the rand, high-yielding currencies strengthen quite significantly, and most of that has been against a backdrop of some quite pronounced dollar weakness.
So that placing the focus on the dollar then, I mean, what do you see happening to the dollar moving forward as we bring in this US data that's coming in more positive than negative, but in the face of accommodative policy as well?
Well, absolutely. I mean, so looking over to this year, we still see some broad-based dollar weakness this year, and that's largely on the back of an expectation that the Fed will probably continue with quantitative easing this year. So that is likely to keep the dollar under pressure. In fact, the only currency against which we'd expect the dollar to perform reasonably well would be against the euro, and that's because, as you know, the euro fundamentally, and because of the debt crisis, has its own problems to contend with. So it's going to continue this year to be a year of both a weak euro and weak dollar story, but looking particularly at that currency pair, we should have the dollar performing relatively better against the euro, but then against a basket of currencies is likely to underperform this year.
Data flow is light today, and so event risk pretty limited, but where that event risk lies is in the US jobs number that the markets are anticipating. Nomvuyo, what are your forecasts on that front, given the jobs data that filtered through yesterday already?
Well, I mean, yes, you're absolutely right that the focus is going to be on today's payrolls and then unemployment number. We would say that the risk, particularly for the rand, probably lies in a downside disappointment in the data. We could see quite a sharp reversal in sentiment based on that, because at the moment markets appear pretty mixed. It looks like everyone's just looking ahead to that payrolls number, and until then there's going to be a relative lack of activity until that number comes out. So certainly a downside surprise in that we'd see as being the main risk factor for the rand today.